welcome to All Things Technical, and today I would like to introduce you to the Triumph Tr6. The Tr6 is basically what you could call the proper British roadster. It is a two-seater convertible with a very sporty attitude. They were built from 1968 to 1976, and this one here is from 1971. Over its lifespan, they built over 96,000 of them in a few versions, and most of them were exported. And as you could probably guess by the name of it, the Tr6 is the successor to the Tr5, which in turn is the successor to the Tr4. No surprises there. Why do I go all the way back to the Tr4? Well, there are a few things that link all of those three cars, and I only have a model of a Tr4, which I haven't built yet. The Tr4 was designed by the Italian Giovanni Michelotti, and therefore it boasts some nice curvy lines. And for the Tr5, Triumph basically kept the design and only really updated the chassis, engine and drivetrain. And then it was time for the Tr6. This time they kept most of the technical components, but updated the design. The Tr6 was designed by the German company Karmann, and you can clearly see the different styles. The Tr6 has many more straight lines and looks a lot more modern than its predecessor. While most of the body was new, the designers were asked to keep the doors from the previous generation. Which is why they have this little, very classic rise at the end here. I'm sure this wouldn't exist had it not been mandatory. But I think it works well with the lines of the car. It breaks up the straight lines a bit. And speaking of straight lines, the Tr6 was not the last car in the TR family. It was then replaced by the Tr7, which, well, looked interesting. Yes, interesting is good. Well, it's a car from the late 70s, so the wedge and pop-up headlights were all the rage. But back to more classic lines. I think the Tr6 looks very elegant. It is very long for a two-seater. It's just over 4 meters. But with only 1.5 meters in width, it is very narrow, and that gives you a lot of room on the road. And what keeps you on the road are, of course, the wheels and tyres. And I think they look really good too. They are big. The wheel really fills the wheelhouse. It looks like there is no space for any movement in the suspension. And frankly, there isn't a lot. But while the wheels are big in diameter, they're still wheels from the 1970s, which means they are very narrow, and you don't get near the amount of grip you get with modern tyres. But being from the 1970s also means that wire wheels weren't the standard anymore. Most Tr6s came with steel wheels with this nice polished aluminium ring. Many people nowadays like to take these wheels off and replace them with much older looking wire wheels. And there are more things in the car that people like to change out, so let's check out the interior. The layout in here is very classic. The dashboard is a literal board. It is completely flat and made out of an actual piece of wood. Although this is probably not the original, because even though British cars from the 70s were known for their precise craftsmanship, the panel gaps weren't that bad. There is a plethora of Smiths and Lucas gauges in here too. We have a coolant temperature gauge to the left, followed by an oil pressure gauge, a clock that was added later, and an ampere meter, as well as a fuel gauge. And of course there are a gigantic speedometer and tachometer behind the steering wheel. And it is the steering wheel that many people like to switch out for one with the wooden rim, even though most of the Tr6s were delivered with a leather one. And I have to say, I quite like it, even though it comes out of the center console at a little bit of an angle. The gear lever too is very classic, as in it is really small, and the 4-speed gearbox takes some time to get used to. But actually, effectively, this car has more than 4 gears. This lever behind the steering wheel here on the left actuates the overdrive, which is basically another set of gears behind the gearbox that drops the RPM of the gear that you're currently in order to save a bit of fuel. because the fuel consumption is not the greatest, and to see why, we'll have to have a look under the bonnet. The bonnet opens towards the front, just like it's supposed on a classic car. That makes working with the engine bay a little bit more difficult. But should the bonnet catch fail while you're out on the road, the wind doesn't rip the bonnet open. And here we have the heart of the Tr6. It's a 2.5 litre inline 6-cylinder engine, and because this is the European version of the Tr6, it is fuel injected. The injection system fitted comes from Lucas, yes, the so-called inventors of electric darkness. The system is fully mechanical and not exactly sophisticated, but apparently cars won races with this injection system. And thanks to it, the Tr6 PI petrol injection makes around 143 horsepower compared to the 95 of the American carbureted version. Why did the Americans get the carburetor? Well, the PI didn't pass the emissions tests. I think it's quite ironic that only a few years later many car manufacturers changed from carburetors to fuel injection just to meet those regulations. But well, this was an early shot at fuel injection. So now, let's see what this thing is like on the road. It's a classic English car, so you never really know what's going to happen when you turn the key. But since it ran earlier, we had to get here somehow, it should start up just fine. Let's take this thing out on the road. So what is the Tr6 like to drive? Well, in short, it's fantastic. But before we get a little nostalgic about what driving a classic car is really about, let's talk about some objective things. There is no power steering here, and the steering wheel is not very big, so going around corners at speed or parking the car on a nice grippy asphalt car park takes a lot of strength. Well, and so does everything else really. The clutch is stiff, the brake pedal travels really far and gets heavier and heavier the further it goes, and the gear lever might be small, but especially second gear takes some caution and force to select. But all of those points should not be seen as negative points. They help to make up the incredible driving experience of this car. But there are also some subjective things that add to that. One is the engine noise. This straight 6 sounds fabulous under load. And it makes you feel like you're going a lot faster than you really are. Well, there is one other thing that makes you feel that way, and that is the speedo. One of the previous owners put a differential with a shorter gear ratio into the rear axle to get better acceleration when going racing, but he didn't tell the speedo that. So now it always shows about 30% more. So no, I am not speeding, the speedo is just too fast. And of course, there is the wind. This is an old convertible, so it's quite breezy in here, and that, in addition with the fact that you're basically sitting on the tarmac, makes you feel like you're going twice as fast as you really are. And since we've been speaking about those subjective things already, let me dive a little deeper into the connection of car and driver. This is as pure as driving a car can get. There is nothing here that tries to take some of the control away from you. It is you, the driver, who makes the decisions, and there is a real unfiltered communication happening between you and the car. You always know what's happening because the car tells you everything that is going on. It doesn't try to hide certain information from you. You get the real feedback of what the tires and the suspension are going through. You tell the car to do something with its mechanical components, and the car does exactly that. And then it tells you the effect this had, and if that effect was that it locked up the wheels because you asked the brakes to brake too hard on a wet road and the tires couldn't cope with the force. It puts more responsibility into your actions because the car doesn't take care of you, but you take care of the car. The car trusts into your ability as a driver and doesn't interfere with any of your inputs. It is you who makes the decisions, and therefore it is you who is responsible for the way the car's driving. But the car helps you to make these decisions because it constantly informs you about what is happening. You feel when the wheels are losing grip, you feel when the brakes are getting hot, and you feel what the road surface is like. So you have all of the information, and it is up to you to interpret those and take action. There is a saying that you can become one with the machine, and this is sort of what is happening here. The car and you start to merge because you are working so closely together, and it takes all of your skill and concentration if you want to drive the best you can. Part of what makes the Tr6 so great to drive is that you're always learning. There is always room for improvement. That last double D-clutch downshift could have been rev matched a little better, or that last steering input could have been a little smoother to give the tyres more time to adjust to the new situation they're in. Frankly, it never gets boring, and it is incredibly rewarding if you've managed to drive a certain section of road smoothly and quickly, even if it takes a lot of concentration and a lot of strength too. You might have to be a real petrolhead to get excited about all of those things, but believe me, if you are, you will love the Tr6. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe if you did. And should you be interested in DIY content, go check out my other channel called AT DIY, All Things DIY. The link is in the description. See you next time.